Hello, I'm King Link, and it's finally time for us to talk about Sonic 2. This game was made by Sonic Team and published by Sega, but that's not the whole story. We are going to get there though. So with the original Sonic the Hedgehog game out of the way, I wanted to immediately talk about Sonic 2 for a couple reasons. I think in a lot of ways, Sonic 2 is the game in the franchise that really defines what a Sonic game is. There are no massive changes to the formula here, but there are quite a few important changes for the series overall, such as the addition of the spin dash, but again, we will get there. I want to remind you guys that this is the second game of my retrospective series on the Sonic games, focused on the PC titles, because I really had to draw a line somewhere. I've previously covered Sonic Mania outside of the series as well, and if you're interested, there'll be a link at the end of the video for that. Last month we covered Sonic the Hedgehog, but stick around, we'll be talking about all the games on the screen at some point this year. Like last time, I think we should dive into the history of the game, especially because Sonic 2 has some interesting lore and history, including some that affects the entire industry. One thing I didn't mention last time though was Sonic the Hedgehog was a pack-in title for the Sega Genesis and Sega Mega Drive. That appears to be the only way anyone was able to get the game. So everyone had a copy of this, at least anyone buying either of these consoles after Sonic's launch. So that was a big game, and Sega of course wanted a sequel, and they just decided to go all in on it, and everything worked out, right? Well, kind of. Yuji Naka, who was the original programmer on the original Sonic the Hedgehog, was unhappy. According to several reports, the big thing that he had an issue with was there was a lack of credit in the original game. He made this massive hit, and no one knew him. Of course, by bringing up the stories, things have changed. But Yuji Naka at the time wanted to leave Sega, and I think he had left it. Sega of America, who was run at the time by Tom Kalinske, of course wanted Sonic 2 because who wouldn't? This was the mascot of a massive company and the new console, so he offered a deal. Yuji Naka and eventually the Sonic team would come to America and work at Sega Technical Institute, known as STI, which was run by Mark Cerny. Cerny, on the other hand, has an equally impressive career for him, working on games such as Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Jak and Daxter, Ratchet & Clank, Uncharted. He's also the lead architect of the PS4, an amazing console, and worked on Knack. Okay, so he's not perfect. I bring this all up because you have two incredible minds that come together to create Sonic 2, and a minor point of contention, but Sonic 2 is actually an American game. There's more to the STI story after this point, and we'll talk about that in the future when we get to stuff like Sonic 3 and Knuckles or Sonic Spinball. Guess which games they worked on, of course. Now this isn't the only major change between Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. This only affected Sonic teams. What about the industry as a whole? Well, Sonic 2 was going to be a huge hit, and to make it massive, Sega did something special. A release date. I've seen a couple pieces claiming that no other game before this got a release date. Like one of the sources is Console War by Blake J. Harris. It's a fantastic read, well worth it. But at the same time, I'm going to say this isn't correct. I actually remember back then, and Super Mario Bros. 3 actually did have a major release. So I don't know if I can agree that it was the first major release. It might be the first worldwide release, but even there, Japan got it 3 days early. It's not important though. Sonic did something more. So not only was it released on a certain day, but that day was Sonic Tuesday. Yes, a complete dad joke, not made by me actually, but actually made by Sega. Here's the thing, Sonic Tuesday was of course Tuesday, November 24th, 1992. And yes, the reason that video games are released on Tuesday ever since that date is because of that dad joke. As a father, I completely love it. It's been over 25 years, and except for like Nintendo, and the fact that release dates are a little bit more spread out at this point, many games are still released on Tuesday, so clearly this had a major impact. Now, I could go into the history of Sega and Nintendo, but the point is Sonic 2 was a major game for Sega. I think we can move on and talk about the game itself. And since I've previously covered Sonic 1, I'm going to be skipping some of the duplicate ideas. This game was made only a couple years after the first, so much of the technology is similar, but there's also a lot of amazing tech here as well. Sonic 2's graphics, though, definitely need to be mentioned. Everything in Sonic 2 has been refined, and the graphics got a lot of love. Sonic does look noticeably better, and I find the animations to be a bit cleaner, but he's really still the same Hedgehog. However, one change is that he's no longer alone. In the background, you can see a new character named Miles Tails Prower. I do want to bring up that he shares a name with my father, which probably only matters to me and my sister, but there's not many Miles in the world. And his name, well, Miles Prower, or Miles per Hour. Okay, Sega, you can stop with these dad jokes, but I still love them. Tails isn't that special yet in the series. He can't actively fly, and he just follows Sonic around, but he's an awesome addition to the series, and I love that Sonic has a buddy who, yeah, he does tend to die, but you know, he keeps coming back. He's immortal or something. He also does damage to the enemies and can collect rings, and if you want, you can even play as Tails just by himself. Kind of a cool feature. The world in Sonic 2 is crisper, every level feels more defined and there's more to discover. It's a better graphical adventure and that helps quite a bit. There's also a lot more diversity in the levels, which helps a lot. I want to discuss them more when talking about gameplay, but these levels look great. There's not a bad looking level here and there's tons of small touches that make them stand out. Some enemies in Sonic 2 are actually copied from the original game, but that doesn't mean they're the same. Every sprite looks like they got some attention, and they all look fresher. And that's just for returning enemies. There's tons of new enemies to discover. I personally love these little chickens that you find on the Winged Fortress, and I'm sure you're going to find something special here as well. Besides, there's also the addition of hazards in this game, in addition to the enemies in the level, such as these blue bouncing bubbles in the chemical plant. And while they do suck, it's clear that they're not intended to be attacked. Compare this to the little bombs in the original game, and I think you can understand why I find this an important change and a better experience. Sonic 2 also feels faster, and I say feels, but it's actually confirmed. They made the game faster with better scrolling and more. Of course, that doesn't mean much since the original game was pretty fast, but Sonic never got up to the top speed in most levels. But don't worry, we now have the spin dash, able to be done by both Sonic and Tails. And I mean, come on, it's the spin dash. I really do mean it when I say that this is the defining ability for Sonic and this entire franchise. Even better, almost every level in Sonic 2 is built for speed, so while Sonic's tight controls are still amazing in the original game, Sonic 2 is faster in every way, and it feels like they haven't given up any of that control for it. And while I won't be playing the music here, the music as well is a masterpiece in Sonic 2. There are tons of tracks here that are extremely memorable, not to mention the song that plays when you're invincible and running around always gets me excited. With that love fest out of the way, well, I guess we have to come back to Earth. We're on the Sega Genesis or the Sega Mega Drive. Listen, the story of Sonic 2 is... okay, it's kind of crap. It's the same story again from the original game. Eggman or Dr. Robotnik, whichever one you want to call him, because it's not really mentioned in the actual game. Either way, our villain is after the Chaos Emeralds. Again. Sonic and Tails try to stop him. Similar to the discussion of lives, I think it's okay to give Super NES and Genesis games a pass on the story. They mostly were in the manuals and aren't exactly special. The idea of having Tails there does expand the world a bit more, and it makes it feel like two friends are battling against Robotnik together instead of just one, and gives the game a more friendly feeling. The levels in Sonic 2 are alright at best. They're not really in order and they feel very random. You go from Emerald Hill Zone to Chemical Plant to Aquatic Ruins to Casino Night. I mean, I think you get the point. This really does not make any sense. As you've been watching me play the game, can you really tell me the order the zones should be in? Well, truthfully, I'm sure many of you can make up a story, but there's not a good reason for this progression. Still, there is a great point at the end of the game as we end the Winged Fortress, which was a giant flying fortress, which was actually after the Sky Chase level, so that made sense. And here we have where Tails is using his plane, the Tornado, to fly Sonic up to the Death Egg and the rocket that's taking Robotnik there. This is a rather cool moment, and it's really the only one in this game, but it is a great addition. And so the story might not win any awards in 2020, but let's get that love fest back and let's talk about the gameplay. That of course is solid once again, and it's light years better than the first game. Before we dive into the levels themselves, I want to talk about this idea of control from last time. In the first game, Sonic was a blast to control, though not exactly speedy. This time around, the control is still here and it's fantastic, but Sonic is actually much faster. The spin dash was added to Sonic 2 to rocket him off in any direction he wished. Sonic can go from 0 to 60 in a second, and it makes the game much more interesting. Now, as mentioned, the game also moves faster to keep up with Sonic, and the experience is great. Those tight controls are even better here because Sonic seems to be able to dodge almost any attack and trap just by how fast he reacts to players' inputs. The biggest overall change in Sonic 2's level is the idea that you can really explore them, though. Let me explain with the Aquatic Ruins on screen. This is, of course, the water level. But is it? You see, I can actually beat the first level of the Aquatic Ruins reasonably fast without even touching the water. There's an upper path and a lower path, and this is actually common in Sonic 2. Some levels might even have a third path. Now, not every level has two fully formed paths, and some levels will cross over, but many levels allow exploration and multiple ways to traverse them, and that's a fresh idea for the franchise. Yes, parts of this was available in the last game, but not to the extent that Sonic 2 does it on almost every level. The levels themselves are better in Sonic 2. Let's start with talking about the most famous level, Casino Night Zone. I mean, come on, if you've played Sonic 2, you've spent a good amount of time here. I think most true Sonic fans will have at least run out of time once or multiple times here. It's just a great level with a ton of fun mechanics. Now, listen, I don't want to get into a big story about microtransactions. I hate them, of course. But the thing is, I keep hearing that simulated gambling in game is going to lead to gambling in real life. Casino Night Zone has a slot machine, and the fact is, as gamers, I grew up with this game, and we all love this game. All my friends did, at least. The thing is, this was the level that we played the most. Almost none of us grew up gambling, and even those who do, it's poker or whatever. It's not this addictive thing. We should at least respect the gamer and the games being made, and realize that we're not as impressionable as people make it out to be. Just a small note, still hate microtransactions, still want it out of games, so whatever. With that quick diversion out of the way, there are many strong levels in Sonic 2 outside of Casino Night Zone. Chemical Plant Zone, the second zone in the game, is so memorable, especially for the fact that you move in multiple directions in the pipes and all. Oil Ocean is also a great level with a lot to see and do. There's some clever fan systems in it, and it's fun and unique. I'm going to be honest, Sonic Mania did a great job with this level as well and made it even better, but it was such a great level in the original game as well. And Wing Fortress is just a blast to play through. It feels unique and special, and it elevates Sonic to something different. At the same time, not every level is great, and some levels are a bit weaker. Sky Chase Zone is entirely too experimental, and while it's an interesting moment in the game, I don't think it holds up. I know people like Mystic Cave Zone, but I'm not a big fan. It just wasn't my favorite level here, and while I praise Wing Fortress, it's a bit too linear at times, and there's a lot of bottomless pits, which is one of the few things I really hate in Sonic 2. And finally, I want to call out Metropolis Zone, which has 3 acts for no reason. You see, every zone in Sonic 2 has 2 acts until the final couple levels. Metropolis Zone has 3 acts. There's just no reason, and it feels bloated with that extra act. Now, the level design of these levels are actually really strong, and many of these levels are some of the best of all time. Not just for Sonic, but for any game out there. Yet, okay, I'd like to talk about the good and the bad with games. And in Sonic 2's case, Metropolis has these spinning nuts that if you spin dash through the level, this can happen. Mystic Caves, the final boss actually doesn't have any rings before him, which makes that single boss extremely hard for this game. And finally, Chemical Plant, again, the second level in the game, the final couple feet, as well as some of the boss area, is extra cheap. If you're trying to rush through the game, I've actually lost 2 runs in that section, just there. Now listen, the original game had a ton of cheap deaths, and I understand that. In Sonic 2, there's only a few areas like this. Those 3 I mentioned are probably the big one outside of Wing Fortress and those bottomless pits, so it is a huge improvement for the series. And if you take a slow, methodical approach to Sonic 2, You'll usually be able to beat whatever is ahead of you, which sounds odd for a game all about speed, but the fact is, a fast approach still works very well, and it's one of the things that really makes Sonic 2 feel so much better. Even like hitting spikes twice in a row was no longer an instant death because they added invincibility. It's clear that Sonic 2 has learned something from the original game and the frustrations people had with it. You've learned, Sega. You'll never make a bad Sonic game again. Oh god, I wish. There are, of course, though, huge improvements to Sonic 2 throughout the entire game. There's more 1-ups all over the game. Rings are easier to find and collect. In fact, most times I actually got hit by something. There's always at least one ring on the screen somewhere outside of the ones I dropped, so it was easy to pick up one and make me safe for the future. Now, the bosses in Sonic 2 tend to be a bit of a mixture, let's be honest. Many bosses are fun to fight and interesting, though a couple of them are a bit cheap. I did call out that Mystic Cave zone for not giving rings right before a boss. The fact is, I only say that because every other level has a few rings right after the last checkpoint. It's a great addition that feels good to the player. Some bosses, though, are harder than the original game. Chemical Plant can be extremely cheap with floors that drop out, and he'll bounce you into those floors as you attack him. Mystic Cave used a cramped zone and falling debris, and the Wing Fortress also used a cramped area, and I'm not a fan of that one. I do have to also talk about the final boss. Similar to Mystic Cave, there's no rings before the final boss. Even worse, there's no rings at all on this level. Joy. You start the fight by fighting a metal version of Sonic, not to be confused by Metal Sonic, but it's really the same thing. Not So Metal Sonic is a little challenging, but repeats a pattern that you can learn well. Once you've beaten the non-metallic Sonic, you have to go up against the second boss, Mecha Robotnik. And again, remember, there's no rings on this level, so one mistake to either boss and you're dead. I don't want to swear, but this is kind of crap. Even better, if you die to Mecha Robotnik, you get to start the whole level over again. Come on. And this is the final level. I understand that they wanted to make it a little bit hard, but come on, this is kind of crap. Changing gears, though, I do want to praise the bonus stage. The ugly and annoying bonus stage of the original game is gone for good, and now we get these amazing half-pipe levels that are just a blast to play, even if they are quite challenging at times. Also, to get a bonus stage, you only have to get 50 rings and find a checkpoint, rather than go to the end of the stage, which doesn't have a boss, which means you can actually hit 2 or 3 bonus stages each level. Now, I do remember enjoying the bonus stages as a kid quite a bit. I'll be honest, today they're a little bit frustrating. Still, I find the bonus stages to be great. It's a huge improvement, and even Tails can pick up some rings. Though, he also tends to hit many of the bombs, so maybe he's not as helpful as you think. At the same time, the bonus stages themselves leave Sonic with no rings after them. It's not really a major problem, it feels like you started a new life and you can go grab rings like normal. But this is also what happened to me right before the Mystic Caves boss. I went from 100 rings to 0, and that's extremely annoying. From that point on in the game, I actually tried to avoid the special stages to skip risking that again. But special stages are important because if you get all 7 emeralds, you get Supersonic! Or if you're playing Tails, you get nothing. Supersonic was such a major addition to the game, though. I remember earning him the first time and having a blast. I loved the invincibility, the speed, and everything, and then I fell in a pit. I remember that this game can still be cheap, but Supersonic is just such a great little addition to the game that only completionists will find. There's also a 2-player mode in Sonic 2, which my kid sister and I actually played quite a bit when we were younger, and it was a blast to play as kids. It's still a blast even today. Admittedly, it's nothing that special, but it is couch co-op, and with everything being a multiplayer online game, it's a minor feature, but it's something special. At the time, also remember that you could play Sonic 2 with 2 characters, compete to beat levels, and both play at the same time. That was something unique, and Nintendo didn't even have that. Even better, if you're playing the single-player mode, someone can actually grab a second controller and start playing as Tails. It was a major feature, and it's still really cool today. It's one of the first examples of drop-in, drop-out gameplay. If the second player is off-screen for a little bit, he'll actually return to Sonic by flying in, and if the second player stops playing Tails, eventually Tails will return to his AI state. While the camera does only follow Sonic, this is kind of an amazing feature for the time period. We can of course talk more about Sonic 2, but I think we've gone over many of the important features. Exploration, 2-player mode, it's a faster game, Supersonic, and so much more. Honestly, if you've somehow never played Sonic 2, you really owe it to yourself. I would recommend this to even a person who says they hate the Sonic series, so they can see why the Sonic series is so popular. And if you have played this game before, you already know how great it is. So as mentioned last time, the purpose of the retrospective review isn't really to review the game, but rather where it sits in the pantheon of Sonic games. Is this a game that you're going to want to play, you want to own, or you might want to skip? But really, is there a question? I think I've been very clear on this. There's some things to criticize with Sonic 2, of course, like I've said, but dear God, Sonic 2 is a masterpiece. This is easily one of the best games of the generation, and a must-play in the Sonic franchise. Get this game. There's so many ways you can play it, and you're going to be guaranteed a good time. And like I said last time, you can actually skip Sonic the Hedgehog and start with Sonic 2. I think that's the best way to play the series. If you actually want to score for Sonic 2, it's a 5 out of 5. Yes, I have many issues with this game, but I also understand it came out in the Genesis, and this is a massive hit of this system. It's a fun, inventive game, and this is why people talk about when they talk about like a game being a system seller. Back then, you would pick up a Genesis, not to play Sonic the Hedgehog necessarily, but to play Sonic 2. And God, I love this game. I think that's been clear. Now, listen guys, next month we'll be talking about Sonic Adventure, and I need to give you guys a trigger warning. I know Sonic fans are super passionate, but I personally am always about being fair with games, and I have a feeling I might be a little harsh on Sonic Adventure. Trust me, I will be as fair as I can be, though, so stay tuned for that. As a small note, I am going to be trying something different with this channel for February. I still want to talk about games, but I think we'll be talking about something a little different than a review. I think you're going to enjoy it. Hit that subscribe button, ring that bell to be notified when I release that, or my Sonic Adventure review, whichever one you're looking forward to. I'll be popping up my Sonic Mania review and my Sonic the Hedgehog retrospective review so you can get caught up on the series if you've missed out on either of those. And until next time, I'm King Link. Thank you for watching.